stop politicizing the science. Tests of scientific literacy show that the deniers are no less knowledgeable than the believers. Vaccines are probably one of the best things our species has ever done. The prospect of nuclear war would be so unthinkable, quite literally lead to the extinction of the human species. One could worry that once that taboo has been breached, once the line had been crossed, many things to fear.
He is the Harvard professor, Steven Pinker.
This lack of separation between the executive and the judiciary, so Trump being able to elect 3 officials onto the Supreme Court.
The United States already is behind the curve in terms of global progress.
The reduction in absolute poverty in the last 200 years, 95% to now something like 13.
The moral imperative is not that everyone have the same. The moral imperative is that everyone has enough.
Yeah, I think that's one of maybe the biggest misconceptions about your work, even in discussions with my friends, is that you're sort of a Whiggish historian. So for our listeners who don't know, that's the idea that progress is sort of inevitable. And yeah, I like your emphasis on forcing that progress through. So I wanted to ask you about one potential way that we can do that. We had Peter Singer on the podcast, who I'm sure you know, who's a big proponent of effective altruism. And like you say, the reduction in absolute poverty in the last 200 years from 95% to now something like 13 has been incredible. And I wonder whether you think in the Western world, in certainly for people who are affluent, whether we should be putting more of our money towards solving that problem and forcing that progress through.
I'm sorry, which problem are you now referring to?
The problem of absolute poverty, starvation, etc. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I do. And I'm... The idea of effective altruism, which has recently taken a beating by guilt by association because Sam Bankman-Fried rather cynically claimed to be an effective altruist in claiming to want to earn as much money and give it away to charity. That was almost certainly cynical and insincere, but it unfortunately tainted the very idea of effective altruism. But I think the idea is utterly sound. Namely, if you are devoting your career to making humanity better off, if you are engaged in philanthropy and donations, and you should do more, as Singer has argued, you should know where that money, where those hours will do the most good. So I think that's an excellent idea. Now, I won't say this is counter Singer, it's maybe complementary. But I'm going to say that the massive amount of reduction of poverty along the order of 130,000 people a day for the last 30 years has not been powered by philanthropy. It's not that lots and lots of people are giving to effective charities, but to economic development. And one could argue that the moral imperative may be, insofar as we can do it, to encourage globalization and economic development as the way to do the most good in the sense of lifting the most people out of extreme poverty. But there's only so much that individuals can do to speed economic development along, but they can give more to charity, and that certainly to effective charities. And we know that that really does save lives.
You mentioned how income inequality is not a fundamental factor in human well-being, and you provide some data for this claim. I was wondering how you square that with maybe Singer's ideas, or if you could just explain it a little bit for our listeners in general.
Yeah, I think Singer's ideas actually don't really refer to inequality; they refer to poverty. That is, if someone's child dies, then the size of Elon Musk's house is irrelevant. What the question is, do people have enough money to feed themselves, to send their kids to school, to enjoy the basic pleasures of life? Now, if you think in zero-sum terms that global wealth is one lump, and if some people have more, that means that other people have less, then you could equate inequality and poverty. But we know that wealth is massively elastic, that 200 years ago, 90% of the world lived in what we would today call extreme poverty. Now it's less than 9%. And that's because we create wealth. And within countries, there's a certain amount of trade-off. Every developed country has progressive taxation and has redistribution. But still, over the course of human history and looking globally, the reason that we have fewer poor people is not that there are fewer rich people, it's that the whole world has gotten richer. And so the imperative, the moral imperative is not that everyone have the same. The moral imperative is that everyone has enough. If everyone is poor, that is not an improvement. But if no one, or at least as few people as possible, are starving, are hungry, are uneducated, are living miserable lives, that is where our moral energy should be concentrated.
Yeah, I just want to push back on that a little bit, because I know the argument sort of not for inequality, but against anti-equality maybe is kind of a pushback of this sort of what is quite common in left-wing discourse, which is that CEOs, for example, are taking a disproportionate amount of money. But I think nonetheless, even if inequality is not intrinsically bad, nonetheless, the amounts being taken, even if the pie can grow, are leading to what I would see as unjustifiable inequalities. So, for example, since 1978, CEO pay has risen by 1,200%, worker pay by 15%. No matter how much the pie grows, most of the pie is still being given to the CEOs. So that's sort of how I'd push back and say maybe that the inequality is representative of something deeper rather than just intrinsically inequality being bad.
One could, of course. It doesn't follow, by the way, that if the CEO pay is increased that much more, that they're getting the majority of the money, because there's only one CEO and an awful lot of workers. And indeed, some of that inequality, a lot of it, is mitigated by taxes and transfers. That when you take into account the various government benefits, even for a country like the United States, which is relatively stingy, we have in the United States there's a lot of redistribution that even though the right-wing politicians rail against it, we got it. It's popular. It's not going to go away. It's probably going to increase, and that's probably a good thing. But yes, I mean not to disagree that the system is probably out of kilter because of misaligned incentives. That the tax code probably tilts toward it being too easy for CEOs to get too much. I do recognize that argument. Now, we have only 4 minutes, so I'm going to suggest that if whatever you want to wrap up with, we should get to that now.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to drop you in a word from our sponsor Manscaped. You can use the discount code LOAF to get your discount, because even a lion needs to tame its mane.
Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped now. Stay fresh with no cuts, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.